A young woman stands trembling on the rough wooden floor of Red Hollow while her drunken father tries to sell her to the highest bidder. The crowd laughs. No one moves to help. Then a stranger steps forward, not to buy her, but to break every rule this town lives by. This is a story about dignity stolen and reclaimed, about two people who refuse to stay broken. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The sun beat down on Red Hollow like a punishment. Dust hung in the air, thick enough to taste, and the wooden buildings leaned slightly as if the whole town had decided long ago that standing straight wasn't worth the effort. It was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere better, except most folks never made it that far. They got stuck. They got tired. They settled for less and called it living. Lena Carter knew that feeling well. She stood outside Macklin's general store with a basket of mending on her hip, squinting against the glare. 22 years old, and already she felt ancient. Her dress was faded calico, patched at the elbows, and her hands were rough from washing other people's clothes. She'd been doing that since she was 14, taking in laundry, sewing hems, scrubbing floors, anything to keep a roof over her head and her father from drinking them into complete ruin. Thomas Carter had been a different man once. Lena remembered him laughing, remembered him lifting her onto his shoulders when she was small. But her mother's death had hollowed him out, and whiskey had filled the empty spaces. Now he was just a husk who smelled like sweat and regret. "Lena!" She turned. Her father was stumbling down the street, his shirt half untucked, his face red and blotchy. People stepped aside to let him pass, their expressions a mix of pity and contempt. Lena felt her stomach drop. "Not today. Please. Not today." "There you are," Thomas slurred, grabbing her arm. "Been looking for you." "I'm working, Pa." She tried to pull away gently. "Got 3 more baskets to deliver." "Work can wait." His grip tightened. "Got something important to discuss." She knew that tone. It meant he'd run up a tab somewhere, or lost money at cards, or promised something he couldn't deliver. It meant trouble. He dragged her toward the Silver Spur Saloon, and Lena's heart sank further. The Silver Spur was owned by Vernon Pike, a man with soft hands and hard eyes who treated women like merchandise. She'd avoided him for years, but her father owed him money, a lot of it, from what she'd heard. "Pa, don't..." "Shut your mouth and walk." Inside, the saloon smelled like stale beer and tobacco. A few men sat at tables playing cards or nursing drinks. Vernon Pike stood behind the bar, polishing a glass with a rag that looked dirtier than the glass itself. He was a heavy man, well-fed in a town where most people went hungry. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thomas," he said. "Right on time? Told you I'd bring her." Thomas shoved Lena forward. She stumbled, caught herself on the edge of a table. "What's going on?" Vernon set down the glass. "Your daddy owes me $300. He can't pay, so we made an arrangement." Lena looked at her father. "What arrangement?" Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. "You're going to work here. For Vernon. Till the debt's paid." "Work here?" She laughed, but it came out sharp and brittle. "Doing what?" Vernon's smile widened. "Serving drinks. Keeping the customers happy. Whatever needs doing." She understood immediately. Her face went hot, then cold. "No. It ain't up to you," Thomas said. "You can't sell me like I'm a horse." "I ain't selling you. You're working off a debt." "Your debt, not mine." Vernon came around the bar, moving slowly, like a cat that's already caught the mouse and is just playing now. "Girl, you don't got a choice. Your pa signed a paper, legal and binding. You work for me now, or he goes to jail. Maybe worse." Lena's mind raced. She had $15 saved, hidden under a loose floorboard in the shack she shared with her father. $15 she'd been hoarding for 2 years, dreaming of stagecoach fare to somewhere, anywhere else. It wasn't nearly enough. "I need time," she said. "Time's up." Vernon reached for her arm. She jerked back. "Don't touch me." The room went quiet. The card player stopped mid-hand. The bartender froze. Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Vernon's expression hardened. "You're making this difficult." "Good." He moved fast for a big man. He grabbed her wrist and twisted, not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to hurt. Lena gasped, tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. "Let her go!" The voice came from the doorway, low and calm, but it cut through the room like a blade. Vernon didn't let go, but he turned. "This ain't your business, stranger." The man in the doorway stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that had seen weather and worse. He wore a long coat dusted with trail dirt, and his boots were scuffed. He didn't look like much, but there was something in the way he stood, loose but ready, that made Vernon hesitate. "I'm making it my business," the stranger said. "She's spoken for." "Don't look spoken for to me. Looks like she's being held against her will." Vernon's jaw tightened. "Her daddy owes me money. We got an arrangement." The stranger's gaze flicked to Thomas, who was trying to blend into the wallpaper. "That true, old man? You sold your daughter?" Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "It ain't like that. Sounds exactly like that." The stranger looked back at Vernon. "How much?" 300. "I'll give you 5. The room went so quiet Lena could hear her own heartbeat. Vernon blinked. "What?" $500 cash, right now." The stranger pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat and tossed it onto the bar. It landed with a heavy thunk. "Count it if you want." Vernon stared at the pouch like it might bite him. Then, slowly, he released Lena's wrist. She stumbled back, rubbing the red marks his fingers had left. "That's a lot of money for a girl you don't know," Vernon said. "My money. My business." Vernon picked up the pouch, weighed it in his hand. Greed and suspicion warred on his face. Finally, greed won. "Fine, she's yours." Lena's stomach turned. She'd gone from one owner to another in the space of a minute. The stranger's eyes met hers, and for a second she saw something there. Not desire, not cruelty, but something else. Something almost like understanding. "Come on," he said. She didn't move. "I don't even know your name." "Caleb Rourke." He nodded towards the door. "And you're leaving with me, or you're staying with him? Your choice." It wasn't much of a choice, but it was more than she'd had 5 minutes ago. Lena looked at her father one last time. Thomas had the decency to look ashamed, but he didn't say a word, didn't apologize, didn't ask her to stay. He just stood there, already thinking about the bottle he'd buy with Vernon's forgiveness. She walked out. Caleb's horse was a big bay gelding, patient and calm despite the noise of the street. He untied the reins and swung into the saddle with the easy grace of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "Can you ride?" he asked. Lena shook her head. He held out his hand. "Then you're riding with me." She hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to find some other way. But there was no other way. There never had been. She took his hand. His grip was firm, and he pulled her up behind him like she weighed nothing. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off, and she felt the solid muscle beneath his coat, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Away from here." That was all he said. He nudged the horse into a walk, then a trot, and Red Hollow began to fall away behind them. Lena looked back once and saw the town shrinking in the distance, the buildings getting smaller, the people becoming specks. She'd lived there her whole life. She'd hated every single day of it. Good riddance. They rode for hours. The sun climbed higher, then started its slow descent. The flat scrubland gave way to rolling hills, then to rocky outcroppings and scattered pines. Caleb didn't talk. He just rode, his body relaxed, his eyes always moving, watching the horizon, the tree line, the trail ahead. Lena's mind churned. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted or where he was taking her. For all she knew, she'd traded one prison for another. But something in her gut said he wasn't like Vernon Pike. He wasn't like her father. He'd had a chance to humiliate her back in the saloon, to claim her like property, and he hadn't. He'd just paid the money and walked out. Why? As the light began to fade, Caleb guided the horse off the trail and into a clearing surrounded by trees. A creek ran nearby, the water clear and cold. He dismounted and helped Lena down, and her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She'd been riding for so long her muscles had gone stiff. "Sit," Caleb said, nodding toward a fallen log. I'll get a fire going. She sat, watched as he gathered kindling, arranged stones, struck flint and steel with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, a small fire crackled to life. He filled a battered coffee pot from the creek and set it at the edge of the flames, then pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. "Ain't much," he said, handing her a piece of jerky, "but it'll keep you going." Lena took it. She was starving. She'd skipped breakfast to finish a mending job, but her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the food. She forced herself to chew, to swallow, to take another bite. Caleb sat across from her, his back against a rock, and ate in silence. The firelight played across his face, highlighting the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away: hard lines, weathered skin, eyes that had seen too much. Finally, Lena couldn't stand it anymore. "Why did you do that?" He looked at her. "Do what?" "Pay for me. You don't know me." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know what it's like to be sold." She blinked. "What?" "Different circumstances, same result." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. Nobody should be owned, not by their debts, not by their kin, not by anybody. Lena wrapped her hands around the cup, felt the warmth seep into her fingers. "So what happens now?" "That's up to you. You paid $500 for me. Don't you want something in return?" His expression didn't change. "I want you to have a choice. That's all." She stared at him, trying to figure out if he was lying, if this was some kind of trap. But his eyes were steady, honest. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said quietly. "Then come with me." "Where?" "Mountains. I got a cabin up there. It ain't much, but it's mine. You can stay the winter if you want. Work things out. Decide what you want to do next." "And if I say no?" Caleb shrugged. "Then I'll take you to the nearest town tomorrow. Give you enough money to get by for a while. Your life. Your decision." Lena looked into the fire. Sparks drifted upward, disappearing into the night. She thought about Red Hollow, about her father, about Vernon Pike's greasy smile. She thought about all the years she'd spent scrubbing floors and mending clothes and dreaming of escape. And now here it was. Not the way she'd imagined. She'd pictured herself saving enough money, buying a ticket, leaving on her own terms. But maybe this was close enough. "I'll come with you," she said. Caleb nodded like he'd expected nothing less. "Get some sleep. We leave at first light." He handed her a bedroll and she spread it out near the fire. She lay down, staring up at the stars through the branches. The night was cold and the ground was hard, and she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They rode higher into the mountains over the next 3 days. The air grew thinner and colder, and the trees pressed in close on either side of the trail. Caleb led the way with the confidence of someone who'd traveled this path 100 times before. He spoke only when necessary, pointing out a landmark, warning her to duck beneath a low branch, asking if she needed to rest. Lena didn't talk much either. She was too busy trying to stay on the horse and keep her teeth from chattering. She'd brought nothing with her from Red Hollow except the clothes on her back and the $15 hidden in her boot. Everything else, the shack, the laundry baskets, the life she'd known, was gone. Good. On the third night, Caleb stopped earlier than usual. They'd reached a wide meadow bordered by aspens, and the creek here was deeper, the water singing over smooth stones. He helped Lena down and nodded toward the trees. "There's a hot spring just past those rocks," he said. "If you want to wash up." Lena's eyes widened. She hadn't had a proper bath in weeks, just cold water and a rag behind the shack. "Really? Really? I'll stay here. You take your time." She didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her bedroll and stumbled toward the rocks, her legs stiff from riding. Beyond them, steam rose from a natural pool fed by the spring. The water was clear and inviting, and Lena nearly cried with relief. She stripped off her dress and undergarments and slid into the water. It was hot, almost too hot. But after a moment, her body adjusted, and she felt the tension in her muscles begin to melt. She scrubbed herself with her hands, washed her hair, floated on her back, and stared at the sky. For a little while, she let herself forget. Forget the past. Forget the fear. Forget the uncertainty. She just existed, suspended in warmth and silence. When she finally climbed out, her skin was pink and wrinkled, but she felt cleaner than she had in months. She dressed quickly, shivering in the cold air, and made her way back to camp. Caleb had dinner waiting, rabbit he'd snared, roasted over the fire, along with wild onions and some kind of root vegetable. It smelled like heaven. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much." She sat down and accepted the plate he offered. The meat was tender, seasoned with salt and herbs she didn't recognize. She ate until her stomach hurt, and even then she wanted more. Caleb watched her with something that might have been amusement. "When'd you last eat a real meal?" "Can't remember." "Then eat slow. Don't want you getting sick." She forced herself to slow down, to chew properly. Across the fire, Caleb leaned back and pulled a harmonica from his coat pocket. He played a few notes, tentative at first, then more confident. The melody was slow and mournful, like something you'd hear at a funeral or a farewell. Lena listened, surprised. "Didn't take you for a musician." "I ain't, but it passes the time." "Where'd you learn?" "My brother taught me, long time ago." He stopped playing, stared at the harmonica. "He's dead now." "I'm sorry." Caleb shrugged. "Life's hard. People die. You keep going or you don't." It was a bleak philosophy, but Lena understood it. She'd felt the same way after her mother died, like the world had split open and swallowed all the light, and she was just stumbling through the dark, hoping not to fall. "What was his name?" she asked. "Jacob." Caleb's voice softened. "He was younger than me, smarter, too. Always reading books, talking about big ideas. He wanted to be a teacher." "What happened?" "Fever took him. We were out on the trail heading west, no doctor, no medicine, just me and him and a whole lot of nothing." He put the harmonica away. "I buried him under a cottonwood tree and kept riding. Didn't know what else to do." Lena's chest tightened. "That's awful." "Yeah, it was." They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled, and somewhere in the distance an owl hooted. Lena thought about her own losses, her mother, her childhood, her chance at a normal life. She'd spent so long being angry about it, but maybe anger was just another way of holding on. "Why'd you help me?" she asked again. Caleb looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Told you already." "I know what you said, but there's more, isn't there?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I watched a girl get sold once. Different town, different situation. I didn't do nothing, just stood there like everybody else. She was crying, begging for someone to help, and we all just watched." Lena's stomach twisted. "What happened to her?" "Don't know. Never saw her again." He poked at the fire with a stick. "But I think about her sometimes. Wonder if things would have been different if just one person had stepped up." "So you stepped up for me?" "Figured it was about time." Lena didn't know what to say to that. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too small, too inadequate. So instead she said, "I won't forget this." "Didn't do it so you'd remember me. Did it so you'd have a chance." Still, she met his eyes across the fire. "Thank you." Caleb nodded, and something passed between them, an understanding, fragile and tentative, but real. They were both broken in their own ways, both running from something. But maybe, just maybe, they could run toward something instead. The cabin appeared on the 5th day, tucked into a hollow between two ridges. It was small, just one room with a loft, built from rough-hewn logs and chinked with mud. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, which meant Caleb had left the fire banked when he'd gone to town. Lena slid off the horse and stared. It wasn't much, but it looked solid. Safe. "Home," Caleb said simply. He dismounted and led the horse to a lean-to shelter behind the cabin. Lena followed, her legs wobbling after so many days in the saddle. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A narrow bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with canned goods and dried herbs. A fireplace took up most of one wall, and above it hung a rifle. The loft was accessible by a ladder, and when Lena climbed up to look, she found a second bedroll and a stack of furs. "You'll sleep up there," Caleb said from below. "I'll take the bed down here." I can sleep on this floor." "You'll sleep in the loft." His tone left no room for argument. Lena climbed back down and looked around, trying to imagine spending the winter here. It was isolated, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by wilderness. If something went wrong, there'd be no one to help. But isolation also meant freedom. No one watching, no one judging, no one trying to sell her. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Caleb glanced at her. "Do?" "To earn my keep. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. You don't owe me nothing, Lena." "I know, but I want to help." He considered that. "Can you handle a rifle?" She shook her head. "Then I'll teach you. Winter up here gets rough. You need to know how to protect yourself." Over the next few days, Lena settled into a routine. Caleb showed her how to load and fire the rifle, how to set snares for rabbits, how to identify edible plants. She was clumsy at first. She'd spent her life indoors, scrubbing and sewing, but she learned fast. Caleb was a patient teacher, correcting her mistakes without making her feel stupid. In return, she took over the cooking and cleaning. Caleb's meals had been functional but joyless, beans and jerky mostly. Lena started baking bread using the sourdough starter she found in a crock, and she made stews with the vegetables from his small root cellar. It wasn't fancy, but it was better than what he'd been eating. They fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings were for chores, hauling water, chopping wood, checking the traps. Afternoons, Caleb went hunting or worked on repairs, and Lena practiced shooting or mended clothes. Evenings, they ate by the fire and talked. The talking surprised her. Caleb wasn't much for conversation, but when he did speak, he was thoughtful. He told her about the mountains, about the animals that lived there, about the changing seasons. He told her about his brother, about the places he'd been, about the mistakes he'd made. And Lena slowly started to talk too. About her mother, who died of consumption when Lena was 12. About her father, who'd been a blacksmith once, before the drink took him. About Red Hollow and Vernon Pike, and all the men who'd looked at her like she was something to be used and discarded. "I used to think I was cursed," she said one night. They were sitting outside watching the stars. "Like I'd done something wrong and this was my punishment." "You didn't do nothing wrong," Caleb said. "Then why'd it happen?" "'Cause the world's unfair, 'cause people are cruel, 'cause sometimes bad things just happen, and there ain't no reason for it." Lena pulled her knees to her chest. "That's a depressing way to look at things." "Maybe, but it's true." She thought about that. "So what do you do? The world's unfair and people are cruel? What's the point of trying?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You try anyway. You find the people who ain't cruel and you hold on to them. You make something good out of the bad. And you don't give up, even when it feels easier to just stop." Lena looked at him. In the starlight, his face was softer, less guarded. "Is that what you're doing? Making something good?" "Trying to." She wanted to ask more, wanted to know what he was running from, what ghosts haunted him. But she didn't. Some wounds were too deep to talk about. She understood that. Instead, she said, "I'm glad you were in Red Hollow that day." "Me too." And for the first time since her mother died, Lena felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The first snow came 3 weeks after Lena arrived at the cabin. She woke to silence, the kind of deep, muffled quiet that only snow can bring. And when she climbed down from the loft, she found Caleb already awake, staring out the window. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Couple inches. It'll melt." He turned from the window, his face unreadable. "But the real snow's coming. Maybe a week, maybe 2. We need to be ready." Over the next few days, they worked without stopping. Caleb reinforced the lean-to where the horse stayed, stacking extra logs against the walls and securing the roof with rope and stones. Lena helped him haul firewood from the forest, her arms aching by the end of each day. They filled every available container with water from the creek before it froze solid. They checked and rechecked their supplies: flour, salt, dried beans, smoked meat. It wasn't abundance, but it would be enough if they were careful. One afternoon, while Caleb was out hunting, Lena explored the small root cellar beneath the cabin floor. It was dark and cold, the air smelling of earth and old potatoes. She found jars of preserves on a shelf: peaches, green beans, something that might have been pickled beets. The labels were faded, the handwriting feminine and careful. When Caleb returned that evening with a deer slung over his shoulders, Lena asked, "Who made the preserves?" He paused in the doorway, snow dusting his coat. "What?" The jars in the cellar. Someone canned those. Caleb set the deer down outside and began the work of gutting and skinning it. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the knife flashing in the fading light. "Woman who lived here before me," he said finally. "She's gone now." "Gone where?" "Dead." He didn't look up. "Fever, same as my brother. Her husband tried to save her, but..." He shrugged. "He left after she died. Couldn't stand being here without her. Sold me the place for almost nothing." Lena watched him work. "That's sad." "Yeah, it is." "Do you ever think about them when you're here alone?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Sometimes, but thinking don't change nothing. They're gone, and I'm here, and that's just how it is." Lena wanted to say something comforting, but she didn't know what. So she went inside and started preparing dinner, leaving Caleb to his work and his ghosts. That night, they ate venison steaks fried in fat, along with boiled potatoes and the last of the wild onions. The meat was tough but flavorful, and Lena ate until she couldn't manage another bite. Across the table, Caleb ate in silence, his movements methodical. "I've been thinking," Lena said, pushing her plate away. "About what?" "About earning my keep." Caleb sighed. "We already talked about this. I know what you said, but I don't like feeling useless." "You ain't useless. You cook, you clean, you help with the chores. That's not enough." She leaned forward. "Teach me more. Teach me to hunt, to trap, to survive out here on my own. If something happens to you, I need to be able to take care of myself." Caleb studied her, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he nodded. "All right, but it ain't going to be easy." "I don't want easy. I want to learn." "Then we start tomorrow." The next morning, Caleb woke her before dawn. The air inside the cabin was frigid, and Lena's breath misted as she climbed down from the loft. Caleb handed her a cup of coffee, strong and bitter, and a piece of leftover bread. "Eat fast," he said. "We got a lot to cover." They went out into the cold. The sky was still dark, stars fading as the horizon began to lighten. Caleb led her to the edge of the forest and showed her how to read tracks in the snow: deer, rabbit, fox. He taught her to recognize the different kinds of scat, to understand what the animals had been eating and where they were likely to go next. "Hunting ain't about chasing," he said. "It's about knowing. You learn the animal's patterns, you figure out where it's going to be, and you wait." Lena tried to absorb everything. She crouched in the snow, studying the delicate prints left by a rabbit, following the trail until it disappeared into a thicket. Caleb watched without comment, letting her figure things out on her own. After an hour, he called her back. "Enough tracking. Now I'm going to teach you to set a snare." He showed her how to choose the right location, a narrow path between bushes where a rabbit would naturally pass through. He demonstrated how to tie the loop, how to secure it to a stake, how to camouflage it with leaves and twigs. His hands moved quickly, confidently, and Lena watched closely, committing every step to memory. "Your turn," he said, handing her a length of wire. Lena's fingers were clumsy with cold, and it took her 3 tries to tie the loop correctly. When she finally finished, Caleb inspected her work and nodded. "Good enough. You'll get better with practice." They set 2 more snares before heading back to the cabin. Lena's hands were numb, her face stinging from the wind, but she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. She was learning. She was becoming capable. Over the following weeks, the lessons continued. Caleb taught her to identify edible plants, roots and berries that would sustain her if she ever got lost. He showed her how to build a fire without matches, using flint and steel and dry bark for kindling. He taught her to skin a rabbit, to gut a fish, to preserve meat by smoking it over a slow fire. And he taught her to shoot. They practiced every afternoon, setting up targets against a fallen log. At first, Lena couldn't hit anything. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, and the noise made her flinch. But Caleb was patient. He adjusted her stance, showed her how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. "Don't think about it," he said. "Just feel it. The rifle's an extension of your body. You and it are one thing, not two." It sounded like nonsense, but Lena tried anyway. She closed her eyes, took a breath, let it out slowly. When she opened her eyes and pulled the trigger, the bullet hit the edge of the target. "Better," Caleb said. By the end of the month, she could hit the center more often than not. She still wasn't as good as Caleb, He could drop a deer at 100 yards without breaking a sweat, but she was improving, and that was enough. One evening, as they sat by the fire cleaning the rifles, Lena said, "Why are you doing this?" Caleb glanced at her. "Doing what?" "Teaching me. Taking care of me. You didn't have to bring me here. You didn't have to do any of this." He was quiet for a moment, running an oiled cloth along the barrel of his rifle. Then he said, "Maybe I needed someone to take care of." Lena blinked. "What do you mean?" "I spent a long time alone up here. Just me and the mountains and a whole lot of silence. It's peaceful, but it's—" He trailed off, searching for the word. "Empty. You get used to it, but that don't mean it's good." "So I'm here to fill the emptiness?" "No." He looked at her directly. "You're here because you deserve a chance, but maybe I needed you here too. Does that make sense?" It did. Lena felt the same way. She'd spent so long fighting to survive, to stay afloat, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone who cared, someone who saw her as more than a burden or a commodity. "Yeah," she said softly, "it makes sense." Caleb nodded and went back to cleaning his rifle. Lena watched him for a moment, then did the same. The fire crackled between them, warm and steady, and outside the wind howled through the trees, but inside the cabin, everything felt safe. The heavy snow arrived in early December. Lena woke one morning to find the world transformed. Snow had piled against the cabin door, and when Caleb forced it open, a wave of white tumbled inside. He swore under his breath and grabbed a shovel. "Stay inside," he said. "This is going to take a while." Lena ignored him. She pulled on her coat and boots and followed him out. The snow came up to her knees and the wind cut through her clothes like a knife. Together, they dug a path from the door to the lean-to, their breath misting in the freezing air. The horse, a patient gelding named Buck, stood in the shelter with snow crusted on his mane. Caleb checked him over, running his hands along the animal's legs and sides, looking for injuries or signs of distress. Buck seemed fine, just cold and hungry. Caleb fed him oats and hay, talking to him in a low, soothing voice. "He's a good horse," Lena said. "Best I ever had." Caleb stroked Buck's nose. "He's gotten me through more storms than I can count." They spent the rest of the morning clearing snow and reinforcing the lean-to. By the time they finished, Lena's muscles were screaming, and her fingers had gone numb despite her gloves. They stumbled back inside, and Caleb built up the fire while Lena peeled off her wet clothes and wrapped herself in a blanket. "You did good," Caleb said, handing her a cup of hot coffee. Lena's teeth chattered. "I can't feel my toes." "They'll warm up. Just don't stick them too close to the fire or you'll regret it." She sat near the hearth, wiggling her toes inside her socks, waiting for the feeling to return. It came back slowly, a painful tingling that made her gasp. "Told you," Caleb said, almost smiling. "You could have warned me better." "Where's the fun in that?" Lena laughed despite herself. It felt good to laugh, even if her body hurt and the storm was raging outside. It felt like something normal, something human. Over the next few days, the snow kept falling. It piled higher and higher, burying the world in white. Caleb and Lena took turns keeping the fire going, melting snow for water, rationing their food. The cabin felt smaller with each passing day, the walls pressing in, the silence growing heavier. Lena tried to stay busy. She mended clothes, reorganized the shelves, practiced tying knots with a length of rope. But there were only so many things to do, and eventually boredom crept in. "Tell me a story," she said one night. Caleb looked up from the piece of wood he was whittling. "A story?" "Yeah, about anywhere you've been, anything you've done. I don't care. I just need something to think about besides this storm." He considered that. Then he set down his knife and leaned back in his chair. "All right, you ever heard of the Badlands?" Lena shook her head. "It's a place out east, nothing but rocks and sand and wind. Hottest place I ever been, and the loneliest. I went through there once trying to get to the Missouri River, ran out of water on the second day." "What'd you do?" "Kept walking. Figured I'd either find water or I'd die, and there wasn't much point worrying about which one it'd be." He smiled faintly. "Found a creek on the third day. It was so muddy I could barely see through it, but I drank till I couldn't hold no more. Tasted like dirt and dead fish, but it kept me alive." Lena wrinkled her nose. "That sounds awful." "It was, but it taught me something." "What?" "That you can survive just about anything if you're stubborn enough." Lena thought about that. Is that why you stayed alive? 'Cause you're stubborn? Mostly, and 'cause I didn't know what else to do. He picked up the piece of wood again, turning it over in his hands. After Jacob died, I thought about giving up, just laying down in the dirt and letting the world take me. But I didn't. I kept going, one foot in front of the other, till eventually I ended up here. Do you regret it? Keeping going? Caleb met her eyes. Not anymore. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Lena felt her chest tighten, felt something shift inside her that she didn't quite understand. She looked away, focusing on the fire, trying to steady her breathing. Tell me another story, she said quietly. And he did. He told her about the time he got caught in a flash flood, about the night he spent treed by a mountain lion, about the old prospector who'd tried to sell him a map to a non-existent gold mine. The stories were rough and unpolished, full of near misses and bad decisions, but they were real. And Lena listened to every word, grateful for the distraction, grateful for his voice cutting through the silence. When the storm finally broke 5 days later, the world outside was unrecognizable. Snow had drifted higher than the cabin windows, and the trees were bent under the weight of it. Caleb forced the door open and stood in the doorway, surveying the damage. We need to check the lean-to, he said. They waded through the snow, which came up to Lena's waist in places. The lean-to had held, but just barely. One of the support posts had cracked, and the roof sagged dangerously. Caleb swore and grabbed a spare log from the woodpile. Hold this, he said, positioning the log under the sagging section. Lena braced it while Caleb tied it in place with rope. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it would hold until he could make repairs. Buck stood in the corner, shivering slightly, and Lena felt a pang of sympathy for him. Poor thing, she murmured, stroking his neck. He's tougher than he looks, Caleb said, but his voice was tight, and Lena could tell he was worried. They spent the rest of the day digging out paths and reinforcing the shelter. By nightfall, Lena was exhausted, every muscle in her body screaming. She collapsed onto her bedroll in the loft and fell asleep almost immediately. She woke in the middle of the night to the sound of Caleb moving around below. She climbed down the ladder and found him by the fire, fully dressed, pulling on his coat. What's wrong? She asked. Buck's acting strange. I'm going to check on him. I'll come with you. No need. I'm coming. Caleb didn't argue. They grabbed lanterns and went out into the freezing night. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and the stars overhead were sharp and bright. Inside the lean-to, Buck was pacing, his ears pinned back, his eyes wide. Caleb approached slowly, speaking in a low voice. Easy, boy, easy. He ran his hands over the horse's body, checking for injuries. When his hand reached Buck's left foreleg, the horse flinched and pulled away. Caleb frowned and crouched down, lifting the hoof. Damn, he muttered. What is it? Abscess in the hoof. Must have gotten bruised when the snow came down. He straightened. It's going to get worse if we don't treat it. What do we need to do? Caleb looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw real worry in his eyes. We need to drain it, and we need to keep him warm and off his feet for a few days. If it gets infected... He didn't finish the sentence. Lena's stomach dropped. Will he be okay? I don't know. They worked through the night. Caleb heated water and soaked Buck's hoof, then carefully drained the abscess with a clean knife. The horse fought him, thrashing and whinnying in pain, and it took both of them to hold him steady. Blood and pus oozed from the wound, and the smell was awful. Caleb packed it with a poultice made from herbs and wrapped it in clean cloth. That's all we can do for now, he said, his voice hoarse. We'll check it again in the morning. They stayed with Buck until dawn, taking turns keeping watch. Lena dozed fitfully, waking every time the horse shifted or made a sound. Caleb didn't sleep at all. He just sat with his back against the wall, his eyes on Buck, his face drawn and pale. When the sun finally rose, Caleb checked the hoof again. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the horse was still favoring the leg. Is that good? Lena asked. It's something. Caleb's voice was flat, exhausted. We'll keep soaking it, keep it clean, and we'll hope. Over the next few days, they fell into a new routine. Every few hours, they soaked Buck's hoof and changed the poultice. Lena took over most of the other chores, hauling water, cooking, keeping the fire going, so Caleb could focus on the horse. She could see the strain wearing on him. He barely ate, Barely slept. He just sat with Buck, talking to him, stroking his neck, willing him to get better. On the third day, Lena brought Caleb a bowl of stew and forced him to eat. "You're not going to help him by running yourself into the ground," she said. Caleb took the bowl but didn't touch the food. "If I lose him, you won't. You don't know that." "No, but I know you're doing everything you can, and sometimes that's all you got." He looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. "He's all I got left from before I came here, before I built this place. He's the only thing that's been with me through all of it." Lena sat down beside him. "Then we'll save him, together." Caleb nodded, and for the first time in days, he ate. On the fifth day, Buck started putting weight on the injured hoof. It was tentative, cautious, but it was progress. Caleb's shoulders sagged with relief, and he let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like forever. "He's going to be okay," he said. Lena smiled. "Told you." By the end of the week, Buck was walking almost normally. The abscess had drained completely, and the swelling was gone. Caleb kept him on light duty for a few more days, but it was clear the worst had passed. That night, as they sat by the fire, Caleb said, "Thank you." Lena looked at him. "For what?" "For helping. For not giving up." He hesitated. "For being here." "Where else would I be?" Caleb didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. Lena felt that same tightness in her chest, that same unfamiliar warmth. She didn't know what it meant, but she didn't push it away. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside the cabin, everything felt steady, solid. Like maybe, just maybe, they'd found something worth holding on to. The cold deepened as January arrived. Lena had thought she understood winter, but the mountains taught her she'd known nothing. The wind came down from the peaks like something alive and angry, rattling the cabin walls and forcing snow through cracks they'd thought were sealed. Ice formed on the inside of the windows, thick enough that she couldn't see out. The world beyond the cabin ceased to exist. Caleb grew quieter. Not distant, exactly, but withdrawn in a way that made Lena nervous. He still did his chores, still checked on Buck, still sat across from her at meals. But something had shifted. She'd catch him staring at nothing, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. When she asked if he was all right, he'd nod and change the subject. She didn't push. She'd learned that much about him. When Caleb was ready to talk, he would. Until then, pressing only made him retreat further. One morning, she woke to find him already outside, chopping wood in the pre-dawn darkness. She pulled on her coat and went to him. The cold hit her like a fist, stealing her breath. "It's not even light yet," she said. Caleb brought the axe down hard, splitting a log cleanly in two. "Couldn't sleep. Nightmares?" He didn't answer, just grabbed another log and positioned it on the chopping block. Lena watched him work. His movements were too forceful, too aggressive. He was attacking the wood, not just cutting it. "Caleb, I'm fine." "You're not." The axe came down again, and this time it stuck. Caleb swore and yanked it free, his breath coming hard. Then he just stood there, gripping the handle, staring at the half-split log. "I keep thinking about him," he said finally. "Your brother?" "Yeah." His voice was rough. "This time of year it gets worse. He died in January, 4 years ago, and every year when the snow comes, it's like I'm back there, watching him die and not being able to do a damn thing about it." Lena stepped closer. "You did everything you could." "It wasn't enough. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes people die anyway, no matter what you do." Caleb turned to look at her, and his eyes were raw. "I should have done more. Should have gotten him to a doctor. Should have... You were in the middle of nowhere. There was no doctor. I should have found one." "How? You can't make miracles happen just by wanting them." He looked away, his jaw working. "I know that. I do. But knowing don't make it hurt less." Lena didn't know what to say to that. She reached out and took the axe from his hands, set it aside. Then she just stood there with him, letting the cold bite through her clothes, letting him have his grief without trying to fix it. After a long moment, Caleb said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not telling me it gets better. For not saying he's in a better place or any of that other nonsense people say when they don't know what else to do." "Does it get better?" "No, you just learn to carry it." They stood in silence for a while longer. Then Caleb picked up the axe and went back to chopping wood, and Lena went inside to start breakfast. But something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a shared recognition of pain. They were both carrying things too heavy to put down, and maybe that was enough. Maybe just knowing someone else understood was all either of them needed. 2 days later, the weather turned. The wind picked up until it screamed around the cabin, and the temperature dropped so fast Lena could feel it happening. Caleb checked their supplies and didn't look happy. "We're low on firewood," he said. "How low?" "Enough for maybe 3 days if we're careful. After that," he didn't finish. Lena felt her stomach clench. "Can we get more?" "I can try. But if this storm's as bad as I think it's going to be, I might not make it back to the woodpile before it hits." "Then we go now. Together." Caleb hesitated. "It's dangerous. Everything's dangerous. Let's go." They bundled up in every piece of warm clothing they owned and headed out into the brutal cold. The wind nearly knocked Lena off her feet, and the snow stung her face like needles. Caleb grabbed her hand and pulled her forward, shouting something she couldn't hear over the roar of the wind. The woodpile was only 50 yards from the cabin, but it felt like miles. They loaded their arms with as much as they could carry and stumbled back. The wind fought them every step, trying to tear the wood from their hands, trying to push them off course. Lena's lungs burned, and her fingers went numb despite her gloves. They made it back and dumped the wood inside. Caleb slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard. "We need more," he said. "I know." They went out again, and again, and again. By the fourth trip, Lena's legs were shaking, and she could barely see through the snow. Caleb grabbed her shoulder and shouted in her ear, "One more load, that's it. We can't risk more." She nodded, too exhausted to argue. They stacked wood in their arms until they could barely walk, then turned back toward the cabin. The wind had gotten worse. It shoved them sideways, and Lena lost her footing. The wood tumbled from her arms, scattering in the snow. "Leave it!" Caleb yelled. "No!" She bent to gather it, her hands clumsy and slow. "Lena, we have to go now." But she was already picking up pieces, refusing to leave anything behind. Caleb swore and dropped his own load, helping her. Together they scooped up what they could and ran for the cabin. The wind was so strong now it felt like a physical thing, like hands trying to drag them back into the storm. They crashed through the door, and Caleb slammed it shut behind them. For a moment they just stood there, gasping, dripping melted snow onto the floor. Then Caleb started to laugh, a wild, breathless sound that didn't seem like it came from him at all. "You're crazy," he said. Lena laughed too, even though she couldn't feel her face. "You're the one who came back to help me?" "Yeah. Guess we're both crazy." They stripped off their wet clothes and huddled by the fire, wrapped in blankets, their teeth chattering. Outside, the storm raged with a fury Lena had never experienced. The cabin shook with each gust of wind, and she could hear things slamming against the walls, branches, debris, who knew what else. "Is the cabin going to hold?" she asked. "It's held through worse." But Caleb didn't sound entirely convinced. They sat close to the fire, feeding it carefully, rationing the wood they'd risked their lives to gather. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. The wind howled like something dying, and the cold seeped through the walls despite the fire. Lena dozed off at some point, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder. When she woke, it was dark outside, and Caleb was still awake, staring into the flames. "You should sleep," she said. "Can't." "Why not?" "Need to keep watch. Make sure the fire don't go out." Lena sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Then I'll keep watch with you." "You need to rest." "So do you. We'll take turns." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too tired. "Fine. Wake me in 2 hours." He lay down near the fire and was asleep almost instantly. Lena watched him for a moment, surprised by how vulnerable he looked with his guard down. The hard lines of his face had softened, and he looked younger, less haunted. She fed the fire and settled in to wait. The cabin creaked and groaned around her, and the wind never stopped. She thought about Red Hollow, about her father, about Vernon Pike. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. A different Lena, one who'd been scared all the time, who'd believed she had no choices. This Lena, the one sitting in a mountain cabin during the worst storm she'd ever seen, was different, stronger, not because she wasn't scared, but because she'd learned to do things anyway. When 2 hours had passed, she woke Caleb gently. He blinked up at her, disoriented. "Your turn to sleep," he said, his voice rough. "Fire's still going. We're okay." She lay down in the spot he'd vacated, still warm from his body, and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, and for once, she didn't dream. The storm lasted 3 days. By the end of it, their firewood was nearly gone, and their food supplies were running dangerously low. Caleb rationed everything. Half portions at meals, 1 cup of coffee a day instead of 2. The fire kept just high enough to keep them from freezing. Lena didn't complain. She could see the worry in Caleb's eyes, the way he kept checking their supplies, doing and redoing the math in his head. They were in trouble, and both of them knew it. On the 3rd night, the wind finally died down. The sudden silence was almost eerie. Caleb went to the window and scraped away the ice to look outside. "Storm's over," he said. "Thank God." Lena caught herself. Thank goodness." Caleb didn't seem to notice. "We need to dig out, check on Buck, see what damage was done." They slept a few more hours, then ventured outside at first light. The world had been remade. Snow had drifted higher than the cabin roof in places, and the lean-to was buried almost completely. Caleb's face went pale. "Buck," he said, and started running. Lena followed, her heart pounding. They dug frantically, scooping snow with their hands, with pieces of wood, with anything they could find. It took nearly an hour to clear the entrance, and when they finally got inside, Lena held her breath. Buck was standing in the corner, covered in snow that had blown through gaps in the walls, but he was alive. Caleb let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and went to the horse, running his hands over every inch of him. "He's okay," Caleb said, his voice shaking. "He's okay." But the lean-to wasn't. The roof had partially collapsed, and one wall was leaning at a dangerous angle. It wouldn't survive another storm. "We have to fix this," Lena said. "I know, but first we need to get him somewhere safe." They cleared enough space in the cabin to bring Buck inside. It was cramped and awkward, but it was warm and dry. The horse seemed confused at first, but he settled down quickly, content to stand near the fire. Caleb spent the rest of the day working on the lean-to. Lena helped when she could, holding boards in place while he nailed them, fetching tools, clearing snow. The work was exhausting, and her hands blistered despite her gloves. But slowly, the structure took shape again. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. That night, they moved Buck back to the repaired shelter. Caleb checked him over one more time, then stood in the doorway, just watching the horse eat hay. "I don't know what I'd do if I lost him," he said quietly. Lena stood beside him. "You won't. You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll help you do everything possible to keep him safe." Caleb looked at her, and something passed between them, something unspoken but understood. They were in this together now. Whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. They went back to the cabin, and Lena heated water for coffee. She was pouring it into cups when Caleb suddenly swayed on his feet. "Caleb!" He put a hand to his forehead. "I'm fine, just tired." But he didn't look fine. His face was flushed, and his eyes were too bright. Lena set down the coffee pot and crossed to him, pressing the back of her hand to his forehead. He was burning up. "You've got a fever," she said. "It's nothing. Sit down." "Lena." "Sit. Down." He sat, more because his legs gave out than because he was listening. Lena's mind raced. She'd seen fever before. It had killed her mother, and it had killed Caleb's brother. She knew how fast it could turn deadly, especially in conditions like this. "When did you start feeling bad?" she asked. "This morning. Maybe yesterday. I don't know." His voice was slurred, distant. "Why didn't you say something?" "Didn't seem important." Lena wanted to shake him. "Of course it's important. You're important." Caleb looked at her, and for a moment his expression cleared. "So are you." Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. Lena caught him before he hit the floor, but barely. He was dead weight, his body limp and burning hot. She managed to drag him to the bed and get him onto it. His breathing was shallow, his skin slick with sweat. Terror clawed at her chest. She was alone. Miles from help, with no medicine, no doctor, nothing but her own 2 hands and whatever she could remember from watching her mother die. No, she wouldn't let that happen. Not to Caleb. Not after everything. She stripped off his wet clothes and covered him with every blanket in the cabin. Then she stoked the fire and set water to boil. She remembered her mother had been given willow bark tea for the pain, but she didn't know if they had any. She tore through the shelves, searching, and finally found a small bundle of dried bark tucked in the back. She brewed the tea and tried to get Caleb to drink, but he was barely conscious. Most of it dribbled down his chin. She wiped his face with a damp cloth, talking to him even though he couldn't hear her. "You're not gonna die," she said. "You hear me? You saved my life, and now I'm gonna save yours, so you better hold on." His only response was a low moan. Lena didn't sleep that night. She kept the fire going, kept changing the cloth on his forehead, kept trying to get him to drink. His fever climbed higher, and he started to shake uncontrollably. She piled more blankets on him, climbed into the bed beside him to share her warmth. "Please," she whispered, "please don't leave me here alone." Caleb didn't answer. His breathing grew more labored, and Lena felt panic rising in her throat. She didn't know what else to do. She'd tried everything she could think of, and it wasn't enough. She stayed beside him through the long night, holding his hand, willing him to fight. And somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, she realized something that scared her more than the fever, more than the isolation, more than anything. She loved him. Not in some distant, grateful way. Not because he'd saved her or given her a place to stay. She loved him because of who he was, gruff and quiet and stubborn and kind. Because he'd taught her to survive, because he'd trusted her, because he'd let her see his grief and his fear without trying to hide it. And she couldn't lose him. "Don't you dare die on me, Caleb Rourke," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare!" As if in response, his breathing evened out slightly. The shaking eased. Lena felt his forehead, and though he was still hot, he didn't feel quite as burning as before. She allowed herself a tiny sliver of hope. Over the next 2 days, she barely left his side. She forced water and tea down his throat, bathed him with cool cloths when the fever spiked, wrapped him in blankets when he shook with chills. She talked to him constantly, telling him stories, telling him about her mother, telling him things she'd never told anyone. "I used to dream about leaving Red Hollow," she said. "I'd picture myself on a stagecoach, going somewhere new, somewhere nobody knew me. I'd get a job in a shop, or maybe as a seamstress. I'd have a little room somewhere all to myself. It wasn't much of a dream, but it was mine." Caleb's eyelids fluttered, but he didn't wake. "But then you showed up," Lena continued, "and you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. Not just freedom, not just a place to stay. You gave me purpose, I guess. You made me feel like I mattered, like I was more than just someone's burden." She brushed a strand of hair off his forehead. "So you gotta wake up. 'Cause I still got things to learn from you, and 'cause I don't want to do this alone." On the third day, Caleb's fever finally broke. Lena woke from a fitful doze to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "Lena," he croaked. She sat up so fast she nearly fell off the bed. "You're awake. What happened?" "You've been sick. Fever. You were out for 3 days." Caleb tried to sit up, but his arm shook and he collapsed back against the pillow. "3 days? Don't try to move. You're still weak." "Buck is fine. I've been taking care of him." Caleb stared at her. "You did all this yourself?" "Didn't have much choice." "Lena, don't." She shook her head. "Don't thank me. Just get better." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "Okay." She sat with him while he drifted back to sleep, this time peaceful instead of restless. And for the first time in days, Lena let herself breathe. He was going to be okay. They were both going to be okay. Caleb's recovery was slow. For the first week, he could barely stand without help, and even sitting up left him breathless and shaking. Lena took over everything, feeding Buck, hauling water, keeping the fire going, cooking meals from their dwindling supplies. She moved through the days in a fog of exhaustion, catching sleep in short bursts whenever Caleb dozed off. He hated it. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened when she brought him broth, in the way he looked away when she helped him to the outhouse. Caleb Rourke wasn't a man who accepted help easily, and being dependent grated on him like sandpaper on raw skin. "I should be doing this," he muttered one morning as Lena handed him a cup of willow bark tea. "You will be, when you're strong enough." "I'm strong enough now." "You collapsed yesterday trying to put on your boots," he scowled into the tea. "That was different." "How?" I lost my balance. Because you're still weak. Lena sat down across from him, her own cup warming her hands. Listen, I know you don't like this, but you spent 3 days burning up with fever, and your body needs time to heal. So drink your tea, eat your meals, and stop trying to be so stubborn. I ain't stubborn, Lena raised an eyebrow. Caleb almost smiled. All right, maybe a little. A little like a mule's a little stubborn. This time he did smile, and Lena felt something warm unfold in her chest. He was getting better, slowly, painfully, but better. By the second week, Caleb could walk without help, though he still tired easily. Lena caught him one afternoon standing in the doorway of the cabin, staring out at the snow-covered landscape with an expression she couldn't quite read. What are you thinking about? She asked. He didn't turn. How close it was. The fever? Yeah, I've been sick before, but never like that. Never where I thought I might actually... He trailed off. Lena moved to stand beside him. But you didn't. Because of you. He finally looked at her and his eyes were serious. I don't remember much, but I remember your voice. You kept talking to me, telling me to hold on, and I did. I wasn't going to let you die. Why not? Would have made things easier for you. All the supplies to yourself, the cabin. Stop. Lena's voice was sharp. Don't talk like that. I'm just saying. Well, don't. You think I want this place without you in it? You think I want to be alone up here? Caleb studied her face. No, I guess not. Then stop acting like you're some kind of burden. You're not. You're... She struggled for the right word. You're my friend. The word felt inadequate, but it was the only one she had. Caleb nodded slowly. You're mine too, he said. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the wind move the snow in patterns across the clearing. And Lena thought about how strange it was that friend could feel like both exactly the right word and nowhere near enough. The food situation grew more serious as the days passed. They were down to beans, a little flour, some dried meat that was mostly fat and gristle. Caleb tried to set snares, but the deep snow made it nearly impossible, and he didn't have the strength yet for a real hunt. We're going to have to ration more, child, he said one night, staring at the near-empty shelves. How much more? 1 meal a day, maybe less. Lena's stomach was already growling constantly. The thought of eating even less made her dizzy, but she nodded. All right. I'm sorry, Caleb said quietly. For what? For bringing you here. If you'd stayed in town, I'd be working for Vernon Pike. Or worse. Lena shook her head. I chose to come with you. Whatever happens, it was my choice. Still, you deserve better than starving to death in a mountain cabin. Maybe, but I'd rather starve free than live in a cage. Caleb looked at her with something like admiration. You're tougher than you look. Had to be, my whole life. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. They made the food stretch as long as they could, but by mid-February they were down to scraps. Lena's clothes hung loose on her frame, and Caleb moved like a man 20 years older. Even Buck looked gaunt, his ribs showing through his coat. One morning, Caleb strapped on his rifle and pulled on his heaviest coat. I'm going hunting, he said. Lena looked up from the pitiful fire she was trying to keep alive. You're not strong enough. We don't have a choice. If I don't bring back meat, we're not going to make it another week. She wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Then I'm coming with you. No, I can shoot now. You taught me. And if something happens to you out there, I need to know where you are. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but you do exactly what I say. No arguing. No arguing, Lena agreed. They set out into the brutal cold. The snow was crusty on top, breaking through with each step to the softer powder beneath. It made walking exhausting, and within an hour Lena's legs were burning, but she kept going, following Caleb's tracks, watching as he read signs in the snow she couldn't begin to interpret. After 2 hours, he stopped and pointed. Deer tracks. Fresh. Lena squinted at the depressions in the snow. They looked like every other mark to her, but she trusted him. They followed the trail slowly, carefully, keeping downwind. The silence of the forest pressed in around them, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the occasional crack of a branch under the weight of snow. Then Caleb held up his hand. Lena froze. Through the trees ahead, she could see movement, a deer picking its way through the snow, searching for something to eat. Caleb raised his rifle slowly. Lena held her breath. The deer's head came up, ears swiveling. For a moment, everything hung suspended. Then Caleb fired. The shot echoed through the trees, and the deer dropped. Caleb lowered the rifle, his hand shaking slightly, and Lena realized it was from weakness, not cold. "Did you get it?" she asked. "Think so. Let's check." They approached carefully. The deer was down, a clean shot through the chest. It had died quickly. Caleb knelt beside it, and Lena saw relief flood his face. "This'll keep us fed for a month," he said. "Maybe more." But getting the deer back to the cabin proved harder than either of them anticipated. Caleb tried to field dress it, but his hands kept slipping, and twice he had to stop to catch his breath. Finally, Lena took the knife. "Tell me what to do," she said. He talked her through it, and she did her best not to think too hard about what she was doing. The work was messy and difficult, but eventually they had the deer ready to transport. They tied ropes around it and tried to drag it, but the snow was too deep and Caleb too weak. "We'll have to make multiple trips," he said. "Take what we can carry now, come back for the rest." They loaded their packs with as much meat as they could manage and started back. The return journey was harder. The meat was heavy, and both of them were running on empty. Lena's vision started to blur at the edges, and she stumbled more than once. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "Fine," she lied. They made it back to the cabin just as darkness fell. Lena's legs gave out as soon as they got inside, and she sat on the floor too tired to move. Caleb wasn't much better. He slumped against the wall, his face gray. But they had meat, real, fresh meat. Lena forced herself up and got a pan heating. She cut strips of venison and fried them in the last of their fat, and the smell alone nearly brought tears to her eyes. They ate in silence, tearing into the meat like animals. It was the best thing Lena had ever tasted. When they couldn't eat another bite, they just sat there, staring at the leftover meat in the pan. "We made it," Caleb said. "Yeah, we did. Tomorrow, we'll go back for the rest." Lena nodded, too exhausted to speak. She climbed up to the loft and collapsed onto her bedroll, asleep before she could even pull a blanket over herself. The next morning, they returned to the deer. Most of it was still there, though some scavenger had gotten to the organs they'd left behind. They loaded up again and made the trek back, their muscles screaming in protest. It took 3 trips total to get everything, and by the end, both of them were ready to collapse. But they had food. They smoked some of the meat, salted the rest, and for the first time in weeks, Lena didn't go to bed hungry. With the immediate crisis averted, Caleb started regaining his strength. He still tired more easily than before, but he could do his chores again, could take care of Buck, could be the capable, self-sufficient man Lena had first met. One evening, as they worked together to repair a section of the cabin roof that had started leaking, Caleb said, "You saved my life." Lena hammered a nail into place. "You already thanked me." "I know, but I don't think you understand what it means." He paused, holding a board steady for her. "I've been alone a long time. Got used to the idea that if something happened to me, that'd just be it. Nobody'd know, nobody'd care. And then you were here, and you fought for me like I mattered. You do matter. To you, maybe, but I ain't never mattered to anybody before. Not like this." Lena set down the hammer and looked at him. "What about your brother?" "Jacob needed me. That's different. You didn't need me. You could have let me die and figured things out on your own. But you didn't." "Of course I didn't." Lena felt her throat tighten. "I told you. You're my friend." Caleb's eyes searched her face. "Is that all?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She thought about the night she'd lain beside him, willing him to live. About the fear that had consumed her at the thought of losing him. About the way she felt when he smiled, when he said her name, when he trusted her with his grief and his stories. "No," she said quietly. "That's not all. What is it then?" She didn't have the words, or maybe she had them but was afraid to say them out loud, afraid that giving voice to the feeling would somehow make it fragile, breakable. Caleb reached out and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "I know I ain't much," he said. "I'm older than you. I'm broken in ways I don't know how to fix, And I don't have anything to offer except this cabin and a hard life in the mountains. But if you'll have me, if you want this, I'm yours." Lena felt tears prick her eyes. "You really think you're not much?" "I know what I am." "Then you're wrong. You're the best man I've ever known. You're kind and strong, and you make me feel like I'm worth something. Like I'm more than what my father thought I was, more than what Red Hollow tried to make me. When I'm with you, I'm just me, and that's enough." "More than enough," Caleb said, and then he kissed her. It wasn't smooth or practiced. Their noses bumped, and Lena wasn't entirely sure what to do with her hands. But it was real and warm, and it made her feel like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When they pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "So what do we do now?" "I don't know," Lena said, and she started to laugh. "I've never done this before." "Me neither." "You've never found somebody I wanted to keep," he said. "Never wanted to wake up next to the same person every day for the rest of my life. But I want that with you." Lena's breath caught. "You mean that?" "Every word." She kissed him again, slower this time, more sure. And when they finally went back to repairing the roof, everything felt different. The work was the same, the mountain was the same, but they were something new, something neither of them had been before. The days began to lengthen as February turned to March. The worst of winter was behind them, though the cold still lingered. Caleb and Lena fell into a new rhythm, one that included stolen moments and quiet conversations and the simple comfort of being near each other. One night, lying in bed with Lena curled against his side, Caleb said, "Marry me." Lena lifted her head. "What?" "Marry me. I know it ain't conventional, and we don't have a preacher or anything, but I don't care about that. I want you to be my wife." "Caleb, you can say no. I'll understand if you do, but I had to ask." Lena pushed herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the firelight. "You're serious?" "As I've ever been about anything." She thought about Red Hollow, about the life she'd left behind. She thought about her father selling her like livestock, about Vernon Pike's greasy smile, about all the years she'd spent believing she had no value. And then she thought about Caleb teaching her to shoot, about sitting beside him during his fever, about the way he looked at her like she was something precious. "Yes," she said. Caleb blinked. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you." A smile spread across his face, slow and genuine and full of something Lena could only call joy. He pulled her close and kissed her, and Lena felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. "When?" she asked when they broke apart. "Soon as the snow melts enough that we can stand outside without freezing to death." "Who'll marry us?" "We'll marry each other. Don't need nobody else." Lena laughed. "That's not how it works." "It's how it works up here." Caleb brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You and me, standing under the open sky, promising to be together. That's all that matters." And Lena realized he was right. They didn't need a church or a preacher or anyone's approval. They just needed each other and the courage to choose this life, this love, every single day. "All right," she said. "When the snow melts, we'll get married." "When the snow melts," Caleb agreed. They spent the next few weeks preparing. Caleb reinforced the cabin, fixed everything that had broken during the winter, made sure they had enough supplies to last through spring. Lena sewed herself a new dress from fabric she found in a trunk under the bed. Simple calico, nothing fancy, but clean and whole. She felt almost giddy with anticipation, like a girl planning her first dance. "You seem happy," Caleb observed one morning. "I am happy." "Good, you deserve to be." "So do you." He kissed the top of her head. "Then I guess we're both getting what we deserve." By late March, the snow had begun to melt in earnest. Water ran in rivulets down the mountainside, and the first green shoots appeared in sheltered spots. The air smelled different, fresh and alive instead of cold and dead. On a clear morning, when the sun was warm and the sky was impossibly blue, Caleb took Lena's hand and led her outside. They stood in the clearing in front of the cabin, surrounded by melting snow and new growth, and faced each other. "I don't know the right words," Caleb said, "but I know what I feel. I love you, Lena Carter. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you never gave up, even when things looked impossible. I promise to take care of you, to stand by you, to be the man you deserve. For as long as I'm breathing, You're mine, and I'm yours. Lena's voice shook when she spoke. I love you too, Caleb Rourke. You saved me in more ways than one, and you gave me a life I never thought I could have. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your wife, to face whatever comes next together. For as long as we're both alive, I choose you. They didn't have rings or witnesses or anything traditional, but when Caleb kissed her, sealing their promises, Lena felt more married than any ceremony could have made her. Hello, Mrs. Rourke, Caleb said against her lips. Lena smiled. Hello, husband. They stood there holding each other, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant sound of water running free, and Lena thought about how far she'd come. From a girl being sold on a saloon floor to a woman choosing her own future, from powerless to essential, from owned to free. The mountains had tested them. The winter had nearly broken them, but they'd survived. And now, standing in the spring sunlight with Caleb's arms around her, Lena knew they'd do more than survive. They'd live. Spring came slowly to the mountains, like a cautious animal emerging from its den. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. Ice broke apart in the creek with sounds like glass shattering, and the water ran fast and cold, fed by snowmelt from higher elevations. Birds returned, their songs filling the silence that had dominated the winter months. And with each passing day, the world felt less hostile, less determined to kill them. Lena woke each morning beside Caleb, still half surprised to find him there. She'd grown up believing marriage meant ownership, that a husband was just another kind of master, but this was different. Caleb treated her like a partner, asking her opinion on repairs and plans, teaching her skills without condescension, trusting her judgment. When they disagreed, and they did, about everything from how to store the remaining venison to whether they needed to expand the garden plot, they argued it out until they found something that worked for both of them. You're stubborn, Caleb said one morning after a heated debate about reinforcing the chicken coop they'd decided to build. So are you, Lena shot back. Yeah, but I'm right. You absolutely are not. He grinned at her, and she threw a dish rag at his head. He caught it, laughing, and pulled her close for a kiss. The argument dissolved into something else entirely, and the chicken coop discussion was tabled until later. This was marriage, Lena thought. Not some romantic fantasy where everything was perfect and no one ever fought. It was two flawed people choosing each other every day, even when it was hard, even when they wanted to throttle each other. It was work and compromise and laughter and occasional frustration, and it was better than anything she'd ever imagined. By mid-April, they'd started working on expanding their little homestead. Caleb wanted to plant a larger garden, raise chickens for eggs, maybe even get a milk cow if they could afford one. Lena threw herself into the work, relishing the burn in her muscles, the dirt under her fingernails, the tangible proof that they were building something. They cleared land for the garden, pulling up rocks and breaking up the soil. Caleb showed her how to test the earth, how to know if it would support what they wanted to grow. They built the chicken coop together, arguing good-naturedly about the design until they found a compromise that satisfied them both. And when it was finished, Caleb rode down to the nearest settlement, a 2-day journey, and came back with 6 hens and a rooster in crates strapped to Buck's saddle. The chickens were scrawny and mean-tempered, and the rooster tried to attack Caleb every time he got near. But they laid eggs, and Lena nearly cried the first time she collected them, still warm from the nests. Fresh eggs. After months of dried beans and tough meat, fresh eggs felt like a miracle. We're really doing this, she said to Caleb that night, watching the chickens settle in their new home. Doing what? Building a life. Making something real. Caleb put his arm around her shoulders. Yeah, we are. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been in Red Hollow that day? Sometimes. But it don't do much good thinking about things that didn't happen. I know, but I can't help it. If you hadn't shown up, she trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. You would have found another way out, Caleb said. You're too strong to have stayed there forever. I don't know about that. I do. You got a fighter's heart, Lena. I saw it that first day, when you pulled away from Vernon Pike. Most people would have just given up, but you fought, and you've been fighting ever since. Lena leaned into him. I'm tired of fighting. Then stop. You're safe here. You don't have to fight anymore. But even as he said it, Lena knew it wasn't entirely true. Life in the mountains was a constant fight, against the weather, against hunger, against isolation. But it was a different kind of fight. This one she chose. This one she could win. The garden went in during late April. They planted potatoes and beans, carrots and squash. Herbs, Caleb said, would help with cooking and with medicine. Lena worked until her back ached and her hands were raw, and every night she fell into bed exhausted but satisfied. She was creating something. She mattered. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Caleb said, "I got something for you." Lena turned to him. "What?" He pulled a small cloth bundle from his pocket and handed it to her. She unwrapped it carefully and found a ring inside, simple, made of twisted wire, clearly handmade. "I know it ain't much," Caleb said, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I made it from some copper wire I had. Thought you should have a ring, even if it's not a proper one." Lena slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "It's beautiful." "It's just wire. It's beautiful," she repeated firmly. "Because you made it for me." Caleb's expression softened. "You deserve better." "I have exactly what I deserve. I have you." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Lena thought about how strange it was that happiness could sneak up on you like this. She'd spent so long just trying to survive that she'd forgotten what it felt like to actually live. But here, in this moment, with Caleb's arms around her and the mountains stretching out before them, she felt alive in a way she never had before. May brought warmer weather and longer days. The garden started to sprout, tiny green shoots pushing through the dark soil. The chickens settled into their routine, the rooster's crow marking each dawn. Buck grazed in the meadow, his coat shining, the injury from winter completely healed. Everything felt full of possibility. But Lena started noticing changes in herself. Her body felt different, tender, sensitive, exhausted in a way that wasn't explained by the work they were doing. Her monthly bleeding didn't come. She tried not to think too hard about what it might mean, but as the weeks passed and the signs became clearer, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She was pregnant. The realization hit her one morning while she was collecting eggs. She stood in the chicken coop holding a warm egg in her hand and felt the world shift beneath her feet. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Terror and wonder warred inside her chest. She'd never thought about being a mother, had never let herself imagine it, not when her own future had seemed so uncertain. And now here it was, happening whether she was ready or not. She told Caleb that night. He was sitting by the fire, mending a harness, when she said, "I think I'm pregnant." But his hand stilled. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "You think, or you know?" "I'm pretty sure. My bleeding's late, and I've been feeling strange, and..." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm scared." Caleb set down the harness and crossed to her. "Scared of what?" "All of it. Having a baby up here, miles from a doctor, not knowing what to do. Being a mother when I had such a terrible example of what parents should be." "Hey!" He cupped her face in his hands. "Listen to me. You're nothing like your father. Nothing. And we'll figure this out, same as we figured out everything else." "But what if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this?" "You can do this. You're the strongest person I know." He kissed her forehead. "And you're not alone. I'm going to be right here with you, every step of the way." Lena felt tears spill over. "You're not scared?" "I'm terrified," Caleb admitted, "but I'm also happy. We're going to have a family, Lena, a real family." She let him hold her, let herself cry, let the fear and the joy mix together until she couldn't tell them apart. And when she finally pulled back, she felt steadier. Caleb was right. They'd survived winter, sickness, near starvation. They could survive this too. The pregnancy progressed through the summer. Lena's body changed in ways that fascinated and frightened her. Her belly swelled and she felt the baby move. Small flutters at first, then stronger kicks that made her gasp. Caleb was endlessly patient, rubbing her back when it ached, bringing her water when the heat made her dizzy, talking to her belly when he thought she wasn't paying attention. "You're going to be a good father," Lena said one evening. Caleb looked up from where he was kneeling beside her, his hand on her stomach. "You think so?" "I know so. I don't know the first thing about babies." "Neither do I. We'll learn together." He smiled and pressed a kiss to her belly. You hear that? Your mom and I are going to figure this out as we go, so you better be patient with us." The baby kicked in response, and they both laughed. But beneath the joy, Lena felt an undercurrent of anxiety that never quite went away. She'd seen women die in childbirth, had heard stories of babies that came too early, or wrong, or not at all. Up here in the mountains, there was no doctor, no midwife, no one who knew what to do if something went wrong. It would be just her and Caleb, and whatever knowledge they could cobble together. Caleb seemed to sense her worry. He rode down to the settlement again in August and came back with a book, a worn medical guide he'd traded for. Together they read through the sections on childbirth, trying to understand what to expect, what to prepare for. "Says here we need clean cloths and hot water," Caleb read aloud. "I know that much. My mother had me at home." "What else did she do?" Lena tried to remember. She'd been so young, and her mother had died when she was 12. She had a neighbor woman help her, someone who'd done it before. "We don't have that." "No, we don't." Caleb closed the book. "Then we'll do it ourselves. We've done everything else ourselves." Lena nodded, trying to feel as confident as he sounded. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep because the baby was pressing on her ribs or her back hurt too much, the fear crept back in. She thought about her mother dying of consumption, about Caleb's brother dying of fever, about all the ways the body could betray you. She thought about dying and leaving Caleb alone. "Stop thinking so loud," Caleb murmured one night, pulling her close. "How do you know I'm thinking?" "I can feel it. You get all tense." Lena sighed. "I'm scared." "I know." "What if something goes wrong?" "Then we'll deal with it, but nothing's going to go wrong. You're strong and healthy, and we've got time to prepare. We're going to be fine." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll be with you, no matter what happens. And I can promise I love you more than anything in this world." Lena turned in his arms, burying her face against his chest. "I love you too." "Then hold on to that. When you get scared, remember you're not alone. Remember we chose this. And remember that whatever comes, we face it together." His words became a kind of mantra for her. When the anxiety threatened to overwhelm her, she repeated them to herself. "We face it together. We face it together." By September, Lena was too pregnant to do much physical work. Her belly was enormous, and she tired easily. Caleb took over most of the chores, insisting she rest, but Lena hated feeling useless. She took to sitting on the porch, mending clothes or shelling beans, anything to keep her hands busy. The garden had done well. They harvested potatoes and carrots, beans and squash, more than enough to last through the winter. Caleb built shelves in the root cellar and showed Lena how to store everything properly. They canned what they could, using the jars from the couple who'd lived here before, and Lena felt a strange connection to that unknown woman. She'd lived here, worked here, tried to make a life in these mountains, and she'd failed in the end. But Lena was determined not to. One afternoon in late September, Lena felt the first contractions. They were mild at first, just a tightening across her belly that made her pause in her work. She didn't say anything to Caleb, not wanting to worry him. But as the day wore on, they got stronger and more frequent. By evening, she couldn't hide it anymore. Caleb took one look at her face and went pale. "It's time?" he asked. "I think so." He moved into action immediately, building up the fire, boiling water, laying out clean cloths. Lena tried to help, but another contraction hit, and she had to grip the edge of the table, breathing through it. "How long between?" Caleb asked. "I don't know. 10 minutes? 15? "The book said first babies take a long time. Could be hours yet." "That's comforting," Lena said through gritted teeth. Caleb helped her to the bed and propped pillows behind her. "What do you need?" "For this to be over." "Anything I can actually give you?" Lena almost laughed. "Water. And stay close?" "I'm not going anywhere." He pulled a chair beside the bed and took her hand. And as the contractions grew stronger and closer together, he sat with her, rubbing her back, offering her sips of water, talking to her to distract her from the pain. "Tell me a story," Lena gasped between contractions. "What kind of story?" "I don't care. Anything. Just talk." So Caleb talked. He told her about the time he and Jacob had gotten lost in a cave system and had to feel their way out in the dark. He told her about a snowstorm so bad he'd had to shelter in a hollowed-out tree trunk for 2 days. He told her about learning to play the harmonica, about the first time he'd successfully hunted a deer, about 1,000 small memories that added up to a life. And Lena listened, gripping his hand, riding the waves of pain. Time lost meaning. The contractions came faster, harder, until they were almost continuous. She felt like she was being torn apart from the inside, and she screamed with it, past caring about dignity or restraint. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "You can. You are." "I can't. You're the strongest person I know. You survived Red Hollow. You survived winter. You survived everything life threw at you. You can survive this. Caleb, I love you, and you can do this." The pain reached a crescendo, and Lena felt something shift. An overwhelming urge to push consumed her, and she bore down with everything she had. Caleb moved to the foot of the bed, his face white but determined. "I see the head," he said, his voice shaking. "Keep going. You're almost there." Lena pushed again and again, until she thought she might die from the effort. And then, suddenly, there was release. A cry filled the cabin, thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. "It's a girl," Caleb said, and his voice broke. "Lena, we have a daughter." He wrapped the baby in a clean cloth and brought her to Lena. She was tiny and red-faced, her eyes squeezed shut, her fists waving in the air. Lena took her with trembling hands and looked down at this impossible little person she and Caleb had made. "Hello?" she whispered. The baby opened her eyes, dark like Caleb's, and seemed to look right at her. And Lena felt something crack open inside her chest, something so huge and terrifying and wonderful that she couldn't begin to name it. "She's perfect," Caleb said, sitting on the edge of the bed, his arm around Lena. "She is." "What should we call her?" Lena thought about it. "Rose, for new beginnings." "Rose," Caleb repeated softly. He touched the baby's tiny hand and her fingers curled around his. "Hello, Rose. I'm your papa." Lena watched them together, her husband and her daughter, and felt tears stream down her face. Happy tears for once. Grateful tears. They'd made it. All three of them. The first few weeks with Rose were harder than Lena had anticipated. The baby cried constantly, and Lena was exhausted from lack of sleep and the demands of nursing. Her body ached, and she felt clumsy and incompetent, like she was failing at this most basic of tasks. Caleb helped however he could. He changed diapers, rocked Rose when she fussed, took her for walks around the cabin so Lena could sleep. He never complained, never acted like it was beneath him. He just did what needed doing. "You're a natural," Lena said one night, watching him soothe Rose with practiced ease. "I don't know about that. I just keep trying things till something works." "That's all any parent does, I think." He looked at her, Rose cradled against his chest. "You're doing great, you know. I know you don't feel like it, but you are." "I don't know what I'm doing half the time." "Neither do I. But we're figuring it out." And they were. Slowly, painfully, they learned what Rose needed. They learned her different cries, her rhythms, the things that soothed her. They made mistakes. Caleb once put a diaper on backwards, and Lena accidentally let the baby get too cold during a bath, but they learned from them. As the weeks turned into months, Rose grew stronger and more alert. She started to smile, then to laugh, a sound so pure and joyful it made Lena's heart hurt. Caleb was completely besotted. He talked to Rose constantly, telling her about the mountains, about the animals, about everything he saw and did, and Rose watched him with wide eyes, as if she understood every word. Winter came again, but this time they were prepared. Their stores were full, the cabin was tight and warm, and they had each other. The cold months passed more easily than the year before, punctuated by Rose's milestones, her first tooth, her first time rolling over, her attempts at babbling that sounded almost like words. One night in January, almost exactly a year after Caleb's fever, Lena woke to find him standing by Rose's cradle, just watching her sleep. "You all right?" Lena whispered. Caleb nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About last year, about how close I came to dying, and how if I had, I'd have missed all this." He looked at Lena. "I'd have missed her." Lena got up and went to him, slipping her arm around his waist. "But you didn't die. You're here. Because of you. We saved each other, I think." Caleb pulled her close, and they stood together in the quiet darkness, watching their daughter sleep. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside, everything was warm and safe. Spring arrived again, and with it came a sense of completion. The garden went in, bigger than before. The chickens laid eggs. Buck grazed contentedly in the meadow. Rose learned to sit up, then to crawl, her chubby hands slapping against the wooden floor as she explored every corner of the cabin. One afternoon in May, Caleb came in from working on a new project, a shed for storing tools, and found Lena sitting on the floor with Rose laughing as the baby pulled herself up using the edge of a chair. "She's going to be walking soon," he said. "I know. Everything's happening so fast." Caleb sat down beside them, and Rose immediately crawled into his lap, babbling happily. "You ever think about Red Hollow anymore?" Lena considered. "Not really. It feels like that happened to someone else, like that wasn't even me." "In a way, it wasn't. You're different now." "So are you." "Yeah, I am." He kissed the top of Rose's head. "I used to think I'd spend my whole life alone up here. Thought that was what I deserved after Jacob died. But then you showed up and changed everything." "I didn't do anything. You're the one who paid for my freedom. And you're the one who taught me I didn't have to be alone, that I could have this." He gestured around the cabin, at the home they'd built, the life they'd created. "I never thought I'd be happy again. But I am." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me too." They sat like that for a long time, Rose playing between them, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. And Lena thought about all the choices that had led them here. Her father's betrayal, Vernon Pike's greed, Caleb's moment of courage in a dusty saloon. Any one of those things could have gone differently, and this life, this perfect, imperfect, hard-won life, would never have existed. But it had gone this way. And she was grateful. As summer deepened, they talked about the future, about maybe getting a milk cow, about expanding the cabin to give Rose her own room as she grew, about the possibility of other children, though Lena wasn't ready for that yet, about whether they should make the trip down to the settlement more regularly so Rose could be around other people. "I don't want her growing up completely isolated," Lena said. "I want her to know there's a whole world out there. We can do that. Maybe make a trip every few months. Let her see other kids, other families." "But we stay here? This is still home?" Caleb pulled her close. "This is always home." In August, they made their first trip down to the settlement as a family. It was a long journey with a toddler, but Rose seemed to enjoy the adventure, pointing at everything with delight. The settlement was small, just a few buildings clustered around a general store and a blacksmith, but it felt enormous after so long in the mountains. People stared at them. Lena was used to that. She'd been stared at her whole life, but the stares were different here. Curious rather than cruel. A few women approached, cooing over Rose, asking Lena questions about her age and her name. "She's beautiful," one woman said. "How old?" "Almost a year," Lena said, holding Rose a little tighter. "And you're up in the mountains? That must be hard with a little one." "We manage." The woman smiled. "I'm sure you do. You look like a strong family." A strong family. Lena turned the words over in her mind as they walked back to where Caleb was loading supplies onto Buck. She'd never thought of herself as part of a family before. Not a real one, anyway. But that's what they were. The three of them against the world. That night, camped halfway back to the cabin, Caleb built a fire and Lena put Rose to sleep in a makeshift bed of blankets. They sat close to the flames, listening to the night sounds of the forest. "That woman today," Lena said. "She called us a strong family." "We are." "I know, but it's still strange to hear it, to think of myself that way." Caleb took her hand. "You're a wife and a mother and the strongest person I know. If that ain't family, I don't know what is." Lena squeezed his fingers. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me this. For believing I was worth saving." "You saved yourself, Lena. I just gave you the chance." "Then thank you for the chance." He kissed her, and they sat together under the stars, listening to their daughter breathe, knowing that tomorrow they'd wake up and keep going, keep building, keep choosing this life. The years that followed weren't easy. There were hard winters and failed crops, illness and injury, and all the small disasters that make up a life. But there were good times too. Rose's first steps, her first words, the day she helped Caleb plant the garden and got more dirt on herself than in the ground. The birth of a son 2 years later, a boy they named Jacob, after Caleb's brother, the way the cabin filled with noise and laughter and chaos. Lena learned that happiness wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the choice to keep fighting for something worth having. And every morning, when she woke up beside Caleb, when she heard her children playing outside, when she looked at the garden they'd planted and the home they'd built, she made that choice again. She chose this life. She chose this man. She chose freedom. On Rose's 5th birthday, they had a small celebration. Lena baked a cake using precious sugar they'd bought in the settlement, and Caleb carved a wooden doll for Rose and a horse for Jacob. The children played while their parents watched, and Lena felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "You look happy," Caleb said. "I am happy." "Good, you deserve to be." Lena thought about the girl she'd been at 22, standing on that saloon floor, believing she had no future. That girl would never have believed this was possible, would never have imagined herself here, surrounded by love and laughter and the evidence of a life well lived. "We did it," she said. "Did what?" "Built something real, something that matters." Caleb put his arm around her. "Yeah, we did." And as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Lena thought about how far she'd come. From owned to free, from powerless to essential, from a girl with no choices to a woman who chose her life every single day. The journey had been brutal. The destination wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. Years later, when Rose was grown with children of her own, she asked Lena about the beginning, about how she'd met Caleb, about the choice to leave everything behind. "Were you scared?" Rose asked. Lena thought about it. "Terrified. But I was more scared of staying." "How did you know it would work out?" "I didn't. Nobody knows that. You just have to decide what you're willing to fight for, and then you fight." "And it was worth it? All of it?" Lena looked at her daughter, strong and confident and free in ways Lena had never been at that age. She looked at her grandchildren playing in the same meadow where she'd learned to shoot, where she'd planted her first garden, where she'd built a life from nothing but determination and love. "Every single day," she said. Because that was the truth. Love wasn't something you found once and held on to forever without effort. It was something you chose over and over, through good times and bad. It was work and compromise and stubborn refusal to give up. It was waking up beside someone who knew all your flaws and loved you anyway. It was building something together that was bigger than either of you alone. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not where you started or what you survived to get there, but the choice to keep choosing, to keep building, to keep loving, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Caleb found her later, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset the way they'd done 1,000 times before. "You all right?" he asked. Lena smiled. "I'm perfect." "Liar. Nobody's perfect." "All right. I'm imperfect and happy and exactly where I'm supposed to be." Caleb sat beside her, their shoulders touching, their hands intertwined. "That's better." And as the mountains turned purple in the fading light, as the wind whispered through the trees, as their grandchildren's laughter echoed across the meadow, Lena knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Every single one of them. She'd chosen to leave. She'd chosen to trust. She'd chosen to fight for a life worth living. And in doing so, she'd found something she'd never known she was looking for. Home. Not a place, but a feeling. Not perfection, but peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. And that, Lena thought, was worth everything.